Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Challenger Exploration Investor webinar. My name's Jane Morgan, and today I'm joined by our Managing Director, Kris and our CFO, Scott Funston. Kris, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, sure. Look, and firstly, everyone, thanks for joining us this morning. And please feel free, any questions, there's a chat function there, or you can actually email them to our Challenger details as well, which is just probably the best one is kris.knauer@challengerx.com.au. But feel free to use the chat function for any questions. Cover page there, that's our Walilan project in Argentina. And what you can't see is about 100 metres to the left, just out of photo, there's a double lane sealed highway. So really good logistics on that project. We've also got national power lines being built about 2 k's from site, which is going to become increasingly important from a cost saving exercise now that we look like we've got a big porphyry sitting underneath the high grade mineralisation as well. So look, again, just a sort of refresher, given most people are shareholders, 2 main projects. Argentina is sort of the lead project. Some great drill results, and we keep getting sort of these great drill results, intrusion hosted gold sitting underneath, and that's not surprising. I mean, really this project's been locked up in a dispute for 15-20 years until we got involved, so it hasn't seen any modern exploration. There's been no mag, no geophysics until we came along. So I'd love to say that we're smarter than the previous explorers, but really it's just a case of applying modern techniques to fertile ground that just hasn't been looked at. Post our raise, we're about to kick off a 35,000 metre drilling program, and that number hasn't been sort of pulled out of the air. That's what we think we'll need in order to get this thing to a couple of million ounces, and mineralisation open in all directions. Then in Ecuador, started off with a small concession, ran some geophysics, because really if porphyry systems aren't near surface, you don't really have a project. Once we sort of saw that first geophysics, we really shut the whole thing down and ran silent until we picked up more ground. One of the pieces of ground we picked up recently, we've sort of got 60 core holes that they'd never really assayed. We sort of looked at the core and thought, gee, looks interesting. And, we're sort of on to a new gold discovery there as well. First hole was 134 metres at a gram. So it's a world-class bulk gold target that will come after Argentina. So, snapshot, I've got my CFO Scott on the line. Scott's background, he was the founding CFO of Avanco. So he's taken a project in South America through from basically exploration through DFS and into production. So we don't need to replace him when we look to get Argentina into production. My background, exploration geo, got into the markets as a mining analyst, and then jumped out about 12 years ago now and became the founding MD of Citadel Resources. It came with a great management team, but sort of 5 years on, that was taken over for $1 billion after we'd finished a DFS and we're about to get into production. Fletch, who's our chairman, was the founding shareholder of Citadel with me. Stuart Munro, exploration manager, he's ex-SRK, was running their sort of small gold team there, and we've sort of pilfered him from SRK. In terms of the top 20, major shareholder is me. I've got about 10% fully diluted. Our chairman's got 5% fully diluted. We basically have, put our own money in, so we've got some serious hurt money in. Fletch put $1.3 million in our raise at 10 cents. And at the moment, cash at the bank is about $21.5 million, and that will let us run really hard for the next 18 months. And, look, we're not going to sit on this money. We'll spend it drilling. The aim here is to pop out with a couple of million ounces in Argentina at the end of this next 12-month period, and then go from there. So Argentina, look, first thing on the resource, the historical resource is 627,000 ounces at, over 13. The average grade of all of the drill holes is about 10 grams gold equivalent. And, I just don't want people disappointed when we come out with a resource towards the end of this year. If you think around about 10 grams gold equivalent, plus there'll be an open cut sort of lower grade component there as well, which is still ultra high grade gold. It'll be lowest cost quartile, but that historical resource we think used a lot of the underground sampling that it just probably wasn't valid. So around 10 grams gold equivalent. Mineralisation is definitely open in all directions, and the first couple of drilling programs we've done, there's just no signs of this mineralisation weakening. We've got this new exciting discovery in porphyry, which basically you've got the high grade wrapping around what now looks like a big porphyry system. And again, not surprising given this thing's seen no exploration for 15 years, apart until we came along. San Juan mining province, I think a lot of people don't understand. San Juan province in Argentina is a tier 1 mining jurisdiction. You've got Barrick there with Veladero. Lundin Group are spending a lot of money putting Jose Maria into production. Fortescue have actually popped up with, they've picked up 3 stranded copper porphyry assets, and they're looking at building a railway. So it's a quality mining jurisdiction. We sit on granted mining leases, so we've spoken to the mines department. If a toll milling or toll treatment operation was to rise, we can be in production in a month, and we've got the surrounding ground as well, which is an EL application that's being awarded. And probably the other piece of news is we're redoing the metallurgical test work now. It's pretty simple, Matt. You basically crush, you run it through a gravity circuit, you get a quarter of the gold out in a gravity circuit, then you float the tails and you produce a high-grade gold and silver concentrate and a high-grade zinc concentrate. Recoveries of about 80% of the gold, silver and zinc. That met work was done 20 years ago. We've sort of done the petrography now, and the gold is reasonably fine. It's 30 or 40 microns, sits with the pyrite, which makes it easier to float. And that met work was done using 150 micron grind. So it just simply wasn't a fine enough grind. So, hopefully when we get this met work done in the next month, you'll get a positive surprise on recoveries as well. The project in itself, you can see what it looks like there on the right. We're sort of simply drilling up dip and down dip and extending a long strike. That hole of ours, that's 6 meters at almost 35 grams. That really tells the story of the project. That is a twin hole of an old Canadian hole that got about 4 meters at 4. And they then retwinned that hole a year and a half later when they worked out recovery as an issue, and they got their sort of 6 meters in the mid 30s. So, what's happening here is the gold sits with pyrite. If you don't get almost 100% core recovery, you're washing out the pyrite ahead of the drill bit and simply understating grade and width. And that's what's happening here. I mean, we're drilling underneath and along strike from old Canadian holes that look like they'd closed this thing off. And simply when we've looked at them, they got 60, 70% core recovery and missed the gold. Some of the intercepts there in our sort of recent drilling program. And in terms of where we are on that program, we've now put out results for the first 15 of almost 80 holes, and we've got another 40, 45 in the system. So, there'll be abundant news to come. And, this 35,000 metre program, we're just waiting for a couple of final drilling quotes, but the aim will be to have an extra 2 drill rigs on site in the next 2 weeks, followed by another couple of rigs, a little bit later. So you'll see a really aggressive drilling program, a lot of news coming. What does the deposit look like? So this is the historical resource in 3D. You can see these east-west Magnata vein and Sanchez vein. They're sort of fairly vertical, dipping out or coming out of the page. They're the controlling structures. So they sit on sort of regional faults. You stand on top of the hill, you can see these things, 5Ks one way, 5Ks the other way. So they control the whole system. You've got a porphyry source at depth. The fluids have sort of come up these faults, and then where it's intersected limestone units and there's some open space, you've got these sort of flat bodies within the limestone beds where the fluids have then come out and replaced along the limestone units. So you've got sort of 2 sets of loads, basically one set sort of dipping 30, 40 degrees down under the plane, and the other sort of, veins are fairly vertical and quite continuous. And, in terms of what we've done, you can see the outcrop, the mineralisation outcropping here in the field. There's been basically no drilling north of the Magnata vein. There's outcrop there. We've sort of pushed it along strike in the Magnata vein 100 metres, down dip 100 metres. We've got this hole we announced a couple of days ago, which pushes the high grade down at least 100 metres into this sort of central zone as well. There's only one hole in the plane of this mineralisation along that 1.2 Ks apart from our hole, and that intersected a metre at a gram with some silver. So, we're pushing the mineralisation at centres and up into Murchilera. We're sort of pushed it south, we've pushed it down dip. This thing is open everywhere, and really it's just limited by drilling. What you had here is you had a Canadian junior that was effectively drilling under old adits and shafts, just chasing assay results in order to get capital raises away. In the south here, we've got mineralisation outcropping another 500 metres south along strike where there's been no drilling. So we'll know exactly how big this system is in the next 8 months once we finish this program. But certainly, I'm confident it's going to be a lot bigger than that historical resource. And I'll just talk about our new sort of porphyry target. So sort of what you see here is you can see the 3D showing this sort of traditional high-grade mineralisation. And then sitting in underneath it in purple, we've shaded the porphyry. Now, This is limited by the drilling and the outcrop we got, so you don't have two blobs, you'll probably have one big blob that sits under. It is open at depth, it's just simply that we haven't got any data down there. The IP shows us that there's a big porphyry system sitting right under this sort of Cerro Norte here. You can see our drill holes here, one at one end, 50 metres at 1.4 grams, open at depth, we're waiting for the bottom 50 metres. And then the hole we announced the other day, which is 116 metres at over a gram here. There's been absolutely no drilling in the middle. We've sort of mapped along strike here. There's, to the north of this hole that got the 116 metres, there is, the porphyry outcrops. It's cut up with veins. It looks quite intensely mineralised. So, we'll be putting some holes in here, basically ASAP. But, you sort of look at this kind of target here, and it's a kilometre long. It's at least 100 metres wide. Just in the top 100 metres, you can get better than 500,000 ounces here. And, this thing is, it's been defined down to sort of 200 metres with drilling. So it's a really big system that basically sits below this high-grade mineralisation. And, this is sort of what it looks like. So the pink is the porphyry. The red is this high-grade mineralisation. You can see in here that it extends down dip, wrapping around the porphyry. It more than likely extends along strike in here. There's just been no drilling in between it. That hole that we've got is up in about here to the sort of right of screen that's got the high-grade there, south of Cerro Norte here. And then the porphyry system, again, it's basically limited at depth. It's only closed off because that's where the data goes to. But what you've got is this big system where you've got a core of porphyry, and then all around the edges of it, you've got this high-grade mineralisation draping it. It's a typical sort of, skarn, endoskarn type, with a porphyry in the middle deposit. Probably your nearest analogy is something like Red Dome and Mungana, which I think's got a resource inventory at the moment of over 3.5 million ounces after they took out 1 million ounces of high grade. That's the style of system that this thing is. And, the beauty of this system is it really doesn't cost us anything extra. All we're doing is extending drill holes 50 and 100 metres that we're drilling targeting the high grade into the porphyry which sits underneath it. And from a mining point of view as well, you basically have to take out the high grade to get to the porphyry. So hopefully you end up in a situation a bit like Cadia and Ridgeway, where your high grade pays for your plant, and then you've got this much larger operation that you expand into using cash flow, where effectively you generate a long life, low cost operation using the porphyry and kick-started by the high grade skarn. So, look, in terms of summary at Wallilan, the photo on the right there shows the scale of the system. So this is the extent here, this 2Ks that we've basically drilled up, the extent that I showed you in the 3D model. Where this question mark here in the middle, we've got mineralisation outcropping down here, 4.5 Ks north, and not on our ground. There's another high-grade gold-silver project on trend. So really there's 10K strike here that is basically unexplored. If this system was in Kalgoorlie, it would have seen a couple of thousand drill holes down to 1,000 metres, and we'd know how big it is, rather than really needing probably another 30, 40,000 metres of drilling to get a feel for just how big this thing can be. So in terms of, news flow, so as I said, the 7,500 metre program, we're sort of 6,500 metres in. Because of COVID slowing down the assays, we've only got the first 15 holes back. But what we have noticed is that in the last 3 or 4 weeks, the lead time for assays has dropped from 6 weeks to 3 weeks. So they're now getting through the backlog. So in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you should expect a flood of assay results. The MET work, which we hope to have back in about a month. And again, the key here is that the grind size they used 20 years ago just simply wasn't good enough. So hopefully we get a positive surprise. In the next 10 days, we aim to get another couple of rigs there. We're just finalising contracts now. And then also we've got some sort of regional geophysics going on now, some mag to follow the IP we've done. So we're interpreting that now, and it looks quite interesting. But we'll come, once we've sort of finished the processing, we'll probably talk about what that looks like regionally. But I think it's fair to say, from what we've seen in that mag, we may well have one rig that's basically chasing some of these targets regionally that we've seen on the mag, and 3 rigs that are drilling the resource out. So I said resource, late this year. And then really this program's aimed at sort of constant resource upgrades. And, once we get this into critical mass, north of 1 million ounces towards 2, that's when we'll sort of look at basically economic studies. There's nothing worse than trying to put this thing in production too early. We originally came in, we'd scoped out a sort of 250,000 tonne per annum float plant that would let us do 50 to 60,000 ounces a year. I think, we do that, we'll look back and say, well, why are we sort of trading at a discount? And that's simply because, at that production rate, you wouldn't have the scale. This looks like it'll be much larger now. And look, just in terms of to give you a visualization of that news flow. So what you see there is on the left, you've got our drilling at Cerro Norte. On the right, you've got our drilling at Cerro Sur in this sort of current 7,500 metre program. The blue is assays pending. The yellow are holes that we've basically got to drill to finish this program. And those sort of 3 holes in red and 10 holes in black are what we've produced so far. So, that's what news flow looks like. There's basically going to be 65 holes by the time we finish this program in the next month that are pending to come out. And then we roll straight into a 35,000 metre program where basically you'll get sort of 3 or 4 times the rate of drilling and 3 or 4 times the news flow. So, that's sort of what we've got to come in the next, 1 to 2 months. You're just going to see drilling results after drilling results, and they should be good drilling results. I'll talk about Ecuador now. So we sit in southern Ecuador. You can see the map showing the major deposits in Ecuador. We're sort of right down the south, which has become one of the hotspots in Ecuador. We're about 40 k's from a new discovery made by SolGold. We actually sit about 7 or 8 k's along strike from a 17 million ounce ore body that's just finished a pre-feas and is going through permitting at the moment. You can see these historical results 20 years ago by Newmont, and they're fantastic results. But, I think it's classic big company stuff. A couple of those holes ended in 5 grams gold. 3 of those holes drilled through more than 100 metres at 0.4, 0.5 grams gold with visual chalcopyrite logged in the core, never assayed for copper. So it's just your sort of typical big company. No Newmont personnel ever went to site. The core logs were all in Spanish. It took me 3 or 4 times to be convinced to go up to site to have a look because it just didn't look like it was a porphyry system. It certainly was. So, what have we done? We've gone in, done a regional rock chip and soil program, regional geophysics, and, I'll sort of run through that now. So this is the model of our concession. You can see here in the red circle here, we've got our high-grade results. They sit in sort of intrusive breccias that have come off a porphyry system. These breccias are sort of anywhere from 2 to 300 metres wide. I think in Newmont's defence, they weren't going to make a big open cut 20 years ago when Newmont looked at it. But I think what they didn't recognise is this is actually, what Cangrejos is. This is this 17 million ounce ore body, Cangrejos, which is 17 million ounces at about 0.7, 0.8 grams gold equivalent. It sits in 20 million year old interbedded intrusive breccias, diorites, porphyry diorites. We sit, less than 10 k's along strike in exactly the same age rocks, 20 million year olds, interbedded intrusive breccias, diorites, porphyry diorites. We've got these high grade breccia pipes either side. We've got one hole in the middle that basically is ore as far as Cangrejos is concerned. Their better results were sort of sub 400 metres from surface, where they're sort of now getting into stuff that goes a couple of 100 metres at 2.5 grams gold. The deepest hole that was drilled here was down to about 330 metres. So you've potentially got a 10 million ounce system sitting in here. These are these holes on the left that were drilled that were never assayed for copper, mainly in sort of, country rocks. But that's sort of indicative of what you see above a system like Katie, where you've got this copper leakage. And for us, really, the play was these prognosed porphyry systems at depth. That's what we were looking for. And so if you sort of keep your eye at these 3 potential porphyry targets, I'll go through to the next slide. And you can see here, these are 250 metre blocks. So you've got 1, 2, 3 sort of porphyry targets, all, no more than 400 metres subsurface. They're, it's a resistivity section. So these things are chargeable at the top, which is probably the pyrite cap that we're seeing. But again, these are, world-class targets. I mean, having said that, from a shareholder point of view, if a junior finds a porphyry, if it's there, invariably you find it on the 21st hole or the 31st hole. So for me to go and poke 20 holes down here, I'm drilling 1,000 metre holes. There is nothing easier to destroy shareholder value than a junior that's underfunded chasing porphyry. So the plan has always been to spend the money in Argentina, where we have a low risk resource upgrade and value uplift. And then once we're properly funded, come back and sort of, drill these targets properly. put together a sort of 20 or 30,000 metre program, and if it's not there, you walk away, and that is still very much the plan. So the smart play for us as shareholders here is the bulk of the money will go to Argentina over the next 12 months. We get sort of an initial resource, a couple of resource upgrades, and hopefully we're looking at raising some money at far higher than current share price, rather than sort of, I suppose, Hail Mary, putting in 10 holes here and hoping one of them intersects something exciting, which they're great targets, but again, that's not the safest way for shareholders. And then I'll just sort of quickly touch on, we ran a couple of IP lines, and the reason we only ran a couple of IP lines is they only see down to 800 metres, and we weren't convinced there was anything in the top 800 metres. So this anomaly 24A, 24B, this is a chargeability plot that basically measures sulfides. So you can see here are these three historical holes that are all 100 metres, 200 metres at a % copper equivalent in what we call the sort of copper breccia. So you come 250 metres down dip, this anomaly is 3 times as wide, 3 times more chargeability. And as part of tying in the geophysics, we actually measured the chargeability, the resistivity response in the core here. There's bits of this core that got 2% copper and a couple of grams gold. And what you see is a pretty straight line relationship between chargeability and grade. And it's simply what you'd expect: more sulfides, more chargeability, more grade. So, down here, there's a target 250 metres wide that's 3 times more chargeable than what we've got up here, where we've intersected 0.5% copper, 0.5 gram gold, open down to 800 metres. This 24C target was never recognised. It doesn't get to surface, but you go and map up at surface, all the fractures above it are stained blue with copper, so you've got copper leakage. So, these are both 100 million tonne envelopes. So again, these are world-class sort of intrusive breccia targets. But again, we've got one IP line here. So now that we've raised this money, we'll go and we'll put a 3D IP grid over here to define these targets before we drill them. But, this could, this 24A and B, that's a 100 million tonne envelope. This 24C is a 100 million tonne envelope. So they're big targets that we hope will be high grade based on sort of drilling that's just tagged the top of them. So, they're world-class targets as well. And then I'll sort of talk about, I suppose, the wild card that's come up. So the map on the right, the red shows our original concession. The blue and purple are the 2 concessions we've recently picked up on. The yellow dot there in the middle, that's actually the high-grade drilling we've done at El Guabo. And then the yellow dot there in the purple, that's the location of these high-grade holes we're re-assaying now up in Ecuador. And you can see that that's a sort of southeast northwest trend, which is the regional trend in the structure. I don't know if you can see, but that creek is dead straight. So it looks like these two line up and form sort of part of a regional fault structure, which is quite interesting and quite exciting, that we'll come back to later once we've done that. But sort of Colorado B, basically it's sort of owned by an Ecuadorian company that's producing 10,000 ounces of gold. We've farmed into and 50% of any sort of bulk deposits we find. And look, we knew when we went into this that they had high grade gold. They're producing 10,000 ounces a year. They'd told us that they had porphyry mineralisation in the drill core that they just didn't know what to do with. They told us they had an exposure in an adit that went over 100 metres at 0.8% copper, 0.4 grams gold. They asked us whether that was interesting. So, we knew that there was mineralisation there. We just didn't realise how significant it was. So again, this is sort of what we knew. This is their main adit. Pre-COVID, we went in and we panel sampled the top 40 metres of that adit. You can see one of our panels here, and the panel samples in the top 40 metres averaged about 1.5 grams gold with some copper. Now, I suppose up front, the veins and the rock down there is ultra hard. I sort of sat the geologist down and said, well, how did you panel? Because I was worried they might have actually taken some of the high grade veins would preferentially stick out. And they assured me that they didn't. But, I'll feel a lot more comfortable saying that this adit goes 1.5 grams once I've got a rock saw sample through the whole thing, which is going on now. But, nominally the top 40 metres goes about 1.5 grams, which sort of tends to fit with what we see in the soil. And then, I'll get on to sort of the major discovery there. So, as I said, these guys have drilled, the best part of 60 holes, chasing extensions to this sort of high grade vein that they were using. We went in, we'd had a look at some of these holes and decided, really we need to assay them. So, first hole we assayed was 134 metres at 1 gram. We've sort of subsequently got back 146 metres at 1.5 grams. This is sort of what it looks like in section. this higher grade zone in the middle, this hole here that got sort of, almost 250 metres of mineralisation, looks like it's more on the edges of the system. But again, you can see something that's 100, 200 metres wide. It actually gets to surface up here, dips, reasonably sort of steeply to the northwest. But look, it's definitely a big system. And, from where we are, there's 60 holes here that we can reassay at $20 a metre, rather than having to sort of drill these things at $320 a metre. This is sort of a section further about 100 metres along strike where you can see this 134 metres at a gram. It's not your typical porphyry system. If you look at the core here through this, the core is all really chopped up and fractured. It looks like it's a big regional fault zone, which sort of coincides with what I said earlier, where it lies on that main regional structural trend. It sits in a sort of metamorphosed diorite unit, which we think is probably a bit more competent or harder. So the fault tends to fracture and open it up. You get sort of tourmalines running through there, which is indicative of sort of really late stage mineralisation. It's high in bismuth, high in arsenic, high in tellurium. It looks more like an intrusion related system, although, a jury's still out. It may just be that sort of late stage gold arsenic flush from a porphyry, but irrespective of that, it's not a traditional porphyry. It is big. It sits on the underground workings, it sits on a 500 metres long. You can see from the section here, it's at least 200 metres wide, outcrops at surface. It's got higher grade zones. In terms of can you do something with this? Kangrios, this is this 17 million ounce ore body, which sits basically 7.5 k's from this drill hole. It's got 1 billion tonnes at 0.6 gold with some copper. They've just finished their pre-fees. It will produce 40,000 ounces a year at an all-in sustaining cost of $600 an ounce. You've got Fort Knox, where they're producing or they're mining 0.4 grams gold ore, all-in sustaining cost of 1,000 grams. You've got Cadia over here as an example. So if you've got enough of it, these things are highly profitable. And, in the context that, the average resource grade of all the existing resources around the world now that are greater than 1 million ounces is just over a gram, this becomes quite an attractive deposit. So, in terms of what's it look like, so this map here shows the antimony in soil. Now, the reason we're showing antimony in soil is, and I'll show a gold and copper in soil map later, the traditional gold and copper in soil just don't seem to image this, whereas the antimony, you can see it simply because the gold's correlated almost 1-for-1 with antimony. So this sort of zooms in. So this, where the red circle is, this is this trend that's 500 metres long. You can see a lot of their drill holes are clustered around here. As I said, it's 200 metres wide, it's 400 to 500 metres long, it's open down to sort of 500 metres. Simple maths tells you that's a 100 million tonne envelope. The question is, what is the grade? And despite having a couple of holes there that give us broad zones of better than a gram, I think if you want to look, you're sitting, along strike from a 17 million ounce ore body that goes sort of 0.7. So that's probably about the mark. But, 0.7 grams gold, if you've got enough of it, and by enough, you probably want 4 to 5 million ounces, can be extremely profitable. And, the key here to this one is, look, we've got this, which, is a 100 million tonne envelope. This is this sort of southwest regional structure. You can see the blue creeks in here. They're dead straight, so they're clearly indicative of big fault that controls this. This is the other regional structure. So what you've got here is, a long strike in the same system. You've got a far bigger and far more intense antimony and soil anomaly with coincident gold. Then you've got another one down here that's, again, twice as long as this one with coincident gold. And this whole ZK103 that, the locals assayed the bottom sort of 10 metres of that, and it's got, I think it's about 6 metres at 2 in there. So there is gold in the system. So, from our point of view, it's not just what we get here, which is where the focus will be, simply because for $400,000, it's like drilling another 60 holes. But really, you've then got something that extends it along here and then extends it here. So the aim here is that this is a much bigger system than just this 500 metre zone, which, on its own, this is probably not big enough for us to start mining. But you add this, and then in the context of 4 or 5 other targets, you can quickly build up a really big gold inventory here very cheaply, which is the plan. So this is, I'd spoken about the traditional soil anomalies that don't image this. So what I'm showing here is a gold and copper in soil anomaly map. The red circle here is where these these historical holes are along this 500 metre trend. And the logical question is you look at it and go, well, why were they drilling there? It's not the best place to drill, which is why we had to show that antimony map. Now, the blue circle here, this is the top 40 metres of the adit, where we've averaged 1.5 grams gold in panel samples. So you can see that makes geological sense with this, big soil anomaly A. And the reason that's never been drilled is that's where their 200-person camp sits. So the old, classic mining, you've always got to drill under your camp. So, we're hopeful that there's a big target under here. This B, C, D and E anomalies, we're re-assaying a hole in here at the moment. There's a hole that it's got 500 metres of, visible chalcopyrite in the core. Now, it doesn't look like it's going to go 0.5% copper. It looks like it's 0.1 or 0.2% copper. But in the context of a porphyry, where this is off the edge of the anomaly and porphyries can zone pretty quickly, if you get a couple of 100 metres in here at 0.1% copper, 0.2 or 3 grams gold, then you go one way, you might get into the middle of it where it might go 3 or 4 times that. So, we're waiting for assays back of this hole now. And really that's the plan for the next 4 or 5 months. We'll re-assay every single one of these holes. A lot of them we don't expect much in, but some along here we've looked at, and we're trying to locate a lot of the holes in the right spots at the moment that look like they should be continuations of this ore body. We'll simply re-assay all of these, and then we'll re-evaluate as to what this looks like in the next 3 months. We've got about 5,000 metres of drilling in the budget to drill on this discovery, which will probably be twin a few holes. And I think some of the holes that look, the Chinese tell us look better, they've consumed the core to assay it, so we'll basically have to re-drill those holes. But the plan here is for a couple of $1 million, probably less, re-assay all the holes, drill 5,000 metres, and hopefully get a JORC resource out here early next year, which really will be our starting point. And again, the plan is not to go and spend $10 million putting holes in these anomalies, because that's the easiest way to have to come back to the market at lower prices. We'll focus on Argentina and then really look to hit this hard in 18 months after we've got a couple of million ounces in Argentina. So I suppose just in summary, where we're lucky is, we really have got a path to be a significant gold producer. We've got our Argentinian project where there's 600,000 ounces of high grade. We think it'll be a lot bigger than that. There's a big porphyry system underneath. You sort of roll forward 5 to 7 years, and you've hopefully got an operation that's producing ultra low cost gold, which then actually makes a big sort of high grade, high capex, or low grade, high capex operation in Ecuador, not so scary and fundable. So we're producing 100, 200,000 ounces a year of low cost gold in Argentina. We can self-fund a $500 or $600 million capex operation to sort of produce 400,000 or 500,000 ounces a year in Ecuador as well. So sort of that is the sort of plan. And look, feel free to any questions anyone's got. You can either email them in our contacts here on the back page. Happy to take any email questions, or if there's any questions that have been sort of rolled through into the chat thing, I'm more than happy to answer them now. So I'll pass back to Jane, who's the moderator, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, everyone. We don't actually have any questions that have come through the chat, but as Kris said, the presentation has been lodged with the ASX now, and our contact details at the very end of that. So feel free to be in touch. Otherwise, thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone.